Alexander Zverev had a very good 2024 season. He made the final at Roland Garros, as well as winning the Paris Masters and the Rome Masters. Two masters, a very successful year. However, in 2025, it seems he took a slight step back. So let's break this down, let's analyse it, and see how his 2025 season unfolded. And before we continue with the video, 99% of you guys are not subscribed. So if you enjoy regular tennis content, do me a massive favour and hit that subscribe button. Well, he began the year very strong with a final at the Australian Open. On a hard court, of course, his favourite surface. I think he's very competitive against anyone on a hard court. He managed to beat some good players like Tommy Paul, Ugo Humbert, a rematch of that Paris Masters final. And he managed to beat Novak. Of course, Novak did retire after the first set tiebreak. However, in the final, he was absolutely blitzed by Jannik Sinner. Straight sets, 6-3, 7-6, 6-3. And I do feel like this set him up for a very poor 2025. It almost mentally broke him, and I don't think he was ever the same since. As, last year, I think he could have, bounced back slightly better because, of course, after that awful injury at the 2022 Roland Garros, him coming back in 2023, 2024 was almost like a bounce back year for that very inconsistent 2023 season where it was a bit up and down, and he had good stretches here, poor stretches elsewhere. Like, for example, he made the semi-finals at Roland Garros. However, in the clay court tournaments leading up to it, like in the Madrid Masters, he got absolutely smoked by Alcaraz. So it was a very up and down year in 2023, and 2024, was a real bounce back year, put him back in that top 3 or 4 players in the world status. And although he did have some troubles in 2024, most notably losing in 5 sets to Taylor Fritz at Wimbledon, and then losing again at the US Open in 4 sets to him, sort of losing at the Lever Cup, he definitely had a Taylor Fritz problem. And we never got to see him play Jannik because he ended up losing to Taylor Fritz so often that we could never see that match against Jannik. So this Grand Slam final at the beginning of 2025 was almost like what we'd been waiting to see all of 2024. However, Zverev just couldn't generate any break points. I mean, it was absolutely absurd. A guy who's so good from the back of the court, a very good baseliner, superb backhand, and he couldn't do anything. And even Zverev said that, I must have a better serve than him. Post-match, he said that even his bread and butter, big serving into big targets, couldn't even generate him that much offense against Jannik. And he became very dark after this match. He said that he felt like he wasn't good enough and that, maybe Sinner is just better than him in all aspects of the game. This really dark mentality really set him up poorly, as I stated before. Then in the South American clay court swing, he lost to Francisco Cerundolo in the quarterfinals, and at Rio, he lost to Comensagno in the quarterfinals. Very early exits for a very top player who you would assume would be the favourite to win both those tournaments, considering how weak the draw was. And then, as we moved on to the hard courts, didn't get much better. Indian Wells, he lost in the first round to Talon Griekspoor, a match he probably should have won, was up for large majorities of that match. Even in Acapulco as well, he lost to Lerner Tien, who had beaten Medvedev at the Australian Open, but still, a young, inexperienced 19-year-old beating, the top seed in Acapulco shouldn't be happening. Even in Miami, he lost to Arthur Fils. Fils is a very good player, however, this was on a hard court, not on a clay court. Once more, Zverev was not putting in these top performances they should be doing from the world number 2/world number 3 at this time of the year. Then his bread and butter, the clay. He lost first round to Matteo Berrettini in Monte Carlo. And of course you can say Berrettini is a good player. However, he hadn't really put much of a good run together beforehand. And in hindsight, post Monte Carlo, he never put such a good run together. So losing to him in the first round on the clay court was very disappointing. He did win his home tournament, beating Ben Shelton in the final. However, at Madrid, once more, he lost to Francisco Cerundolo on the dirt. And in Rome as well, he couldn't defend his title, losing in the quarterfinals to Mazzetti. Now, this is not a bad loss, considering Mazzetti was probably the second or third best player on the clay courts during this stretch. However, Zverev being a top 2 player in the world, and once more being a very good clay court player, was just very concerning for him to be losing to Mazzetti, a guy who he should really, be stopping his streak, stopping his red-hot form, like he did with Arthur Fils in the round of 16 in Rome. Fils was having a very good clay court season, but Zverev said, no matter how good you are, your slight inexperience will, be shown when you play a top guy like Zverev. However, against Mazzetti, he couldn't do anything about it. Then at Roland Garros, he made it to the quarterfinals. However, he lost to Novak Djokovic. And this is a 2025 Novak Djokovic who easily got handled by Sinner in the next round. And a guy who Zverev should be beating at this point, because Djokovic isn't the same guy that he was 2-3 years ago. His movement's not there. And it's just very confusing that Zverev still decides to play the same way against Novak. Very passive baseline rallies where he just needs to attack him, go forward, go to the net, hit bigger on his forehand, take his backhand down the line more often rather than being happy to accept a backhand-to-backhand exchange. And Novak really just capitalized, hit loads of drop shots on Zverev, and Zverev never adjusted. He never changed his game plan. And I think that extended rally really showed Zverev's mentality, having 3 overheads, all of them going towards Novak, and somehow ended up back on the baseline. I mean, Zverev should be doing better because Alcaraz and Sinner did handle Djokovic better. Of course, Alcaraz lost to Novak in that Australian Open quarter-final. However, that was more so on Alcaraz losing that match rather than Novak's level being unbelievable. Of course, Novak did reach an unbelievable level. However, he was injured, and Alcaraz really decelerated on his serve and his forehand for most of that match. Then on the grass courts, didn't get any better, once again losing to Fritz and Medvedev, 2 players that given him real problems. And at Wimbledon, as we all know, that 5-set loss to Arthur Rinnik-Nesh just, summarized his entire season up until that point. Very disappointing, very close, because he is there or thereabouts, but when he hits a stumbling block, hits a challenging player in a quarterfinals in an earlier stage, he just can't seem to get over the line. And I think one of the worst offences of his year was not winning the Toronto Open. I mean, there was no Alcaraz and Sinner in this draw. He was the top seed, and he lost in the semi-finals to Karen Khachanov, a guy who has the same game style as him, but Zverev is better than him. He has a better backhand, better serve, and yet he lost in 3 sets. Granted, it was a 3rd-set breaker. However, he shouldn't be losing this. He should be taking home these titles from Sinner and Alcaraz and Djokovic, and not in the draw. Then, in Cincinnati, lost to Alcaraz. He wasn't feeling well that day. However, he did put together some good wins. Of course, he kind of avenged his loss in the previous tournament, defeating Khachanov despite him retiring in the 2nd set, and defeated Shelton, defeated both finalists from that Toronto Open. Then at the US Open, kind of summing up his slam season up until that point, lost to Felix in 4. And although Felix was playing a very, very good level that tournament, and of course reached the semi-finals, gave Jannik a real run for his money, Zverev once again, 3rd round loss of a slam, really under-delivering and underperforming. And I guess his favourite part of the season, the indoor hard courts, wasn't much better. He lost in Shanghai to Arthur Rinnik-Nesh once more. Of course, Shanghai isn't an indoor tournament. However, Zverev has reached the semi-finals of Shanghai before, so he's a very good player on these hard courts. And in Vienna, I guess kind of the highlight of his year perhaps was how close he played Jannik in Vienna, because it was very close, 7-5 in the 3rd. Zverev did have his opportunities. It was 5-all juice, and Jannik showed Zverev how you should play these big points. Jannik was fearless, went for his shots, and got some winners at that point. Zverev played very passively, very timid. And in the Paris Masters, of course, he managed to get over the hump and beat Medvedev for the first time in a while. However, he wasn't 100% healthy against Jannik and fell to a bagel and a breadstick. And at the ATP Finals, a tournament that he's won twice in the past, beating Novak and Medvedev in the final, no less, 2 very, very good indoor hardcourt players, he didn't even make out the group stage. Of course, he lost to Jannik, where he couldn't convert a single break point, like in the... And against Felix as well, lost in straights. And you can say what you want about Jannik's level that day, because he came up with some huge first serves. But once more, not making out of your group from a 2-time previous champion is very concerning to me, considering these are his favourite conditions, his favourite surface, and thus raises the question, with this drop-off, is Zverev in decline? Well, in my opinion, hopefully not. I do feel like he just needs a break mentally. As you said, he hasn't been 100% healthy all year, and I do think that Australian Open took a toll on him, so hopefully this off-season he can mentally reset and come back stronger for 2026. So thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe. Take care and peace.